What's up, guys? We're in Moody Coliseum. We're going to be talking about sponsorship activation and leveraging. Follow me.
Andy England, ex-CMO of Miller Coors, explained that 20 years ago, activations and advertisements were much simpler. Sponsoring the 4 big sports and getting involved with a few big concerts was all you needed to deliver your brand's message. Now, there's so many different new opportunities with so many different streaming options, a much more widespread music landscape, and the rise of social media. The focus of the companies have shifted to integrate their brands into what their desired audience is passionate about.
So first what we're going to do is talk about some basic definitions. Sponsorship activation is the extra marketing techniques that a sponsor uses to promote their brand.
How a sponsorship works is a company and a team come together to create a partnership. So for example, behind me you can see Plains Capital Bank. They paid SMU to put their name on the Jumbotron. So that is sponsorship activation.
Another important term that we need to talk about is leveraging. Leveraging can be defined as the investment in communicating about and through the sponsorship that is in excess of the sponsorship deal. Activation and leveraging go hand in hand. Activation is a form of leveraging oriented towards engagement with the audience. Leveraging is often considered the standard activities around a sponsorship, while activation is thought of as value-added activities that use creative efforts to maximize the sponsorship. Some common examples of activation are hospitality or super creative marketing. The benefits of sponsorship cannot be attained without activation because activation is necessary for the sponsorship program to be leveraged to achieve the desired marketing and business outcomes for the organization.
Another example is the John Deere Classic. As you can just assume by the name, it is a golf tournament sponsored by John Deere, an agricultural construction forest machinery tech service. And walking through the gates, the audience is forced to walk through an area with over 20 tractors and family-friendly areas where children can putt using a John Deere machine or photo stand-ins like this one. And as you can see, it's a photo of me, but on the bottom right of the stand, it also has an activation of visitquadcity.com, and as you can see, it also says QC. And this is just a website about a guide for the regional quad cities, just the cities that are in Iowa and Illinois. But another one is on the 18th green. It features a truck in the middle of the lake, and each tee box has a little John Deere Classic tee marker. And these are just a few of the activations of John Deere and other companies.
There are tons of examples of sports activation in the Moody Basketball Center. You can see that we have State Farm, and their activation is right behind the basketball rim. And that's not a very ideal spot because it's small and also not a great spot for television for them to be able to see the State Farm signs and activation. But when you see stuff like Capital Title or Origin Bank, which are in big bold letters on the court, constantly on TV, on ESPN and other big networks, those are ideal spots for sports activation.
So in order to ensure that I have a successful activation, what I want to do is make sure that my activation ratio is at least 1-to-1. So what that means is if I pay $10,000 for a sponsorship, I spend at least $10,000 extra dollars on the activation. So let's say Plains Capital Bank spent $30,000 to be a sponsor of SMU. They will then spend at least $30,000 on extra activations in order to ensure that it's worth it, to make it worth it. And if the more they spend, then the more likely it'll be successful.
The whole point of sponsorship activation is to reach your target demographic. There are a lot of sports that do a really good job at that. The one that I want to highlight is the UFC. That's a primarily male-dominated viewer base, and the UFC does a really good job of having sponsors and sponsorship activation in their octagon that are very much targeted towards males. Just a couple to look at would be like Proper 12 Whiskey, which is a whiskey company funded and created by UFC superstar Conor McGregor. So a lot of people who are fans of a UFC fighter are going to be drawn to his brand. Also, you have brands like Monster Energy, very much a male-targeted brand, and DraftKings as well, which is a sports betting brand, which is very male-targeted as well. So the UFC does a great job overloading on brands that are targeted right at their audience, rather than trying to expand their audience and find other people. They target the people they have and make a lot of money through that.
Some important steps for activating a sponsorship include a corporation must spend above and beyond the cost of sponsorship to maximize the value of the investment. Know and understand the idea of the sponsorship plan before finalizing the negotiation.
How to create a slam dunk activation.
Defining quantifiable objective and measurement methods. Without clearly stating objectives, measuring the success of the sponsorship must be clear. Another step of activation will be developing ideas and brainstorming. Taking inventory of companies' sponsorship assets. Getting insights into the sports property and the fans or customers. Also determining the company's objective. Another step to activation will be to test ideas with the target audience. Another step to activation is implementing the sponsorship activation plan. And finally, measuring the results of the plan.
So how many activations do we really have at an SMU basketball game? We have 1 activation for Neighbors Credit Union on the terminal, 2 activations for Neighbor Credit Union on the terminal, 3 activations for Neighbors Credit Union on the terminal. Down towards the court, we have an activation for UT Southwestern Medical Center and a spot on the court that could be used for an activation, but that's just the Moody Coliseum. Those terminal boards are electronic, so they can switch to different companies.
BioFreeze teamed up with the LA Dodgers for a simple yet successful activation. The Dodgers placed the BioFreeze logo on its starting lineup graphic. Because these lineup graphics are so highly shared on social media, BioFreeze has reached so many more viewers than they would have on their own. BioFreeze did the same thing with the New York Yankees starting lineup last year, as well as sponsoring Stadium Experiences sweepstakes. Overall, BioFreeze drove in over $2 million from that deal. Now majority professional teams include a sponsor on their graphics to maximize activation assets.
Pizza Hut secured naming rights for the virtual venue in Madden NFL 2020, where EA Sports will host the games of the Championship Series MCS. Pizza Hut is already the official pizza of the NFL, and moving into Madden shows their interest in reaching both young fans and esports fans, given that the MCS is streamed on YouTube and Twitch. EA has a lot of control over the frequency of the activation, as they can easily release software presentation updates, bringing attention to Pizza Hut branding without much effort from Pizza Hut.
So what's in the future for sponsorship activation? In 2022 and beyond, sponsorship activation has to be less about singular transactional moments and more about meaningful and connected moments. The next generation of sponsorship activation will be saturated with technology that crushes the scale versus impact trade-off. What this means for activation is that it's much more important to focus on activations that will grab the target audience rather than simply creating activations to reach many people at once. Those ahead of the curve will have a huge competitive advantage over those who don't realize this trade-off. Technology is fundamental in the next generation of venue interaction and fan engagement. The game doesn't start at the whistle and end when the clock hits 0, so activation shouldn't either. In 2022, we have the technology to allow us to continue impacting fans at all times with our activations, so it wouldn't make sense for us not to use this technology.
So you're probably wondering how sponsorship activation relates to revenue generation for a sports team. Well, the percentage of revenue generated from corporate partnerships could range depending on the team. With that, depending on the value of the asset influences the revenue generated. A company pays for the activation, which increases a team's revenue, and that company then initially loses revenue, but in hopes for it to pay off in the long run with their activation and to profit as well, and just to get customers in general.
What I learned about activation is that it is part of sponsorship, and it's the aspect that brings it to life and not just the sponsorship itself.